In, in answering the questions that the ABC Radio National 114 Grey St. South Brisbane, Australia posed to me on 15th October 2020 on a critique of Ubuntu philosophy, I want to read the questions that were sent to me as follows. What do we mean when we talk about African philosophy? The second question was, how would you define Ubuntu? Where does the word come from? In what ways does it make sense to call it a philosophy? And in what ways, perhaps, is philosophy not the right word? The third question I got from this Australian ABC Radio National for live broadcast was, I am because we are. I am because we are. What ideas does this express? What parallels does this notion have in Western philosophy? And question 4, in I am because we are, who is we? Can this ethic be harnessed? Or has it historically been harnessed to privilege one clan, one tribe, one ethnic group, one nation over another? Or is it always an expression of global kinship? Question 5 posed to me, Ubuntu has failed in addressing the concerns of African women. How? Question 6, some discussion of the relationship in Ubuntu between communal solidarity and personal responsibility. Where are the lines drawn? Where are the lines drawn? The seventh question is, what role is Ubuntu playing in the reconstruction of post-Africa, post-colonial Africa? Where do we see its successes and perhaps its failures? I want to comment a little and say that first, what do we mean when we talk about African philosophy? African philosophy can best be premised on the fact that every human mind works on the principles that are philosophically hinged, even though they might not be clear to an individual. Now, if philosophy is defined as a love or reasoning about wisdom of the people, then every person has philosophy in him or her, even though one may not be conscious of it or may never know how to articulate it. Number 3, to this end, every human society has a philosophy, both in the strict and loose sense of the word. For indeed, people's thought systems and doings constitute a philosophy. But the better way to understand African philosophy is to look at both the ethno-philosophical schools and professional schools of African philosophy, because it appears that African philosophy is either ethno-philosophy or professional. Now, let's try to understand each of them, each of the two terms. Now, in attempting to define African philosophy, it is critical to underline the two major schools of philosophical thoughts that lay a claim in defining it. That is, ethno-philosophical school and professional school. Ethno-philosophy holds that, or contends that, an African philosophy indeed exists, and that it is not a phenomenon that is being created, established, or developed. Rather, it is something that needs revelation and interpretation. To this end, ethnophilosophers make a bold statement to their European counterparts that Africans possess a system of thought that reveals a system of philosophy of religion and of cosmology similar to that of Europeans. As a matter of fact, ethnophilosophy came into existence in 1945 following the publication of Placide Tempels. The book Placide Tempels wrote in 1945 is known as Bantu philosophy, and it was given the name ethnophilosophy because it attempted to translate African ethnic thought into categories and language of Western philosophy. Now, some of the categories are ontology, substance, essence, and being, while its chief proponents are John Beatty of Kenya, Alexis Kagame of Rwanda, Temples, and Marcel Griore of France. All in all, different ethnophilosophers portray diverse views to qualify and distinguish philosophy, or distinguish this ethnophilosophy or philosophy in general. In particular, John Beatty, an ethnophilosopher, employs the notion of time. Griore, the French scholars who had interest in African philosophy, brings out the notion of nomo, and Kagame the notion of being. In regard to the other school of philosophy in African philosophy, the so-called professional school, it was started in 1960s by professionally trained philosophers, all of whom studied philosophy at European universities and later taught at African universities. They taught philosophy in African universities. And they include Kwasi Wilendu of Ghana, Ondera Oruka of Kenya, and Peter Bodlin of Nigeria. Accordingly, this school of thought has many elements in common with Western philosophy. Actually, it's more of a duplication of Western philosophy. That is, its modes of argumentation and criticism, plus its insistence that logic, in its strict and academic meaning, is the only tool of philosophizing. Again, its emphasis is individualistic as opposed to collective thoughts. It is mainly a personal reflection on specific issues and concepts that are problematic to an individual. In agreeing with ethnophilosophers to an extent, ethnophilosophers such as Beatty, Kagame, and others, however, insist that African philosophy consists of a body of logically coordinated thought on the nature of the universe, of existence, on the nature of humanity and on the nature of the things that surround humanity. This logically coordinated thought is obtained from the interpretation of basic cultural beliefs. To this end, our position, or my position in this presentation, is in working agreement with ethnophilosophers that there is a distinct African philosophy which is expressed in the belief systems among the Africans from time immemorial. In view of this, I consider African philosophy as that which is articulated through general acts of hospitality. That is Ubuntu. That is humaneness. Also, the African philosophy is articulated through political ideologies such as negritude, well thought out philosophies, political ideologies such as negritude, African socialism, among others. African philosophy is also articulated, in my view, through proverbs that attempt to shed light on the universe, human beings, nature, the well-being, the being of the people, among others. African stories also articulate African philosophy, particularly the stories that attempt to explain through reason, because philosophy has a reason as a critical factor, if not the pivot of it all. So the stories that explain tend to, or attempt to explain through reason about the origin of life, about the origin of death, the origin of ethnic diversities and divisions and areas of unity and other things that are well reasoned out and brought to the fore, among others. It is also African philosophy is also expressed through African rituals that attempts to explain the rites of passage, such as the birth, marriage, among others. It's also expressed and articulated through African traditions, such as the people's beliefs, people's attitudes, and African arts, such as dance, songs, among others. Now, answering the second question, how would you define Ubuntu? Where does the word come from? In what ways does it make sense to call it a philosophy? And in what ways, perhaps, is philosophy not the right vocabulary? Now, let me say that as an aspect of African hospitality, Ubuntu enriches African philosophy by its clear and concise way in which it expresses the thinking of the ideal African, Muntu, the ideal African. That is the way Ubuntu does. It triggers our thinking to think through who is the real Muntu, the Bantu for a person. Who is the real African person? Who is the real person? And that is where it triggers us to think deeply about humanity, about our existence, our existential positions as a people. In various publications, it is critical to underline that Ubuntu has been referred to as Ubuntu philosophy. You may ask why? Who made it philosophy? Does it meet the Western canon of philosophy or the Greek canon of philosophy? Of course, we don't have to go by the canons of other people, though we need always to compare with them. We have to compare notes always. So why is it a philosophy? Yeah, why is it referred to as philosophy? It is one of the most published aspects of African philosophy. It is one of the most published aspects of African hospitality, rather, that clearly embodies the positive thinking of the African people, the most reasoned out, the most thought out, the most correlated, the most thought about, the most synthesized, to use Hegel's words, the most antithesis, all that. It is a lot has been written about Ubuntu to classify it through thinking and analysis. There is even doubting about it. There is also the methodology of doubting, as you see in the car in Ubuntu, where it has been doubted a lot. Till we came to a conclusion, really there is Ubuntu philosophy. Even if you want to doubt it, you find these analysis, these discussions really philosophize the whole concept, making it graduate to a philosophy. Because it's about the African thinking, the positive, particularly positive. Though, as we shall see, it has some negative issues when we think through. Like any philosophy, every philosophy has defects. No philosophy is perfect. Every philosophical position has its own defects. Ubuntu philosophy inclusive. Nevertheless, this reference takes us back to our introduction or introductory definition on what is African philosophy. That is where this argument is leading us. In other words, is there any philosophy in the concept of Ubuntu? Can we talk of African philosophy really? Really, can we talk about African philosophy in the first place? Now, are Africans capable of philosophizing? Are Africans able to philosophize? Are their minds in the category of Greece that can think deeply and do philosophizing, reasoning out deeply? Can we really reason, we black people with kinky hair? Can we think? Can we reason out? Yes, can we make a contribution in the global in the global scene, in the era of globalization? Can an African think? And even before globalization, in the 12th century, before the coming of Christianity in Africa, before coming of Islam in Africa, before the coming of westernization, were Africans capable of thinking through issues, discussing through issues, analyzing issues through, doubting things through, working out issues through? Were they able? Are Africans today really capable of philosophizing quite in the same way as we talk of Greek philosophy, or Indian philosophy, or Chinese philosophy, or even European philosophy? Are Africans there? Is the traditional African mind really capable of philosophizing, theologizing? Are they capable of working out something critical and creative and innovative? Are Africans able? Can they be critical, creative, and innovative? And must African philosophy be at par with Western philosophy? Now, let us go now to the origin of this debate in order to understand this question. It may look simple, but it has to be taken through far. It may force us to flash back, to reminisce, to have a reminiscence of sorts, to recall, to make a recollection of what happened over 200 years ago. Now, this debate, however, started over 200 years ago, when the renowned German idealist G.F. Hegel, Friedrich Hegel, who lived between 1770, when he was born, and died in 1831. In his famous book, Philosophy of History. In that book, actually the founder of this debate is this man, Friedrich Hegel, this German idealist, philosopher. You may call him a dualist or philosopher. And in his famous Philosophy of History, he ignored Africa. He said, I can't see anything philosophy in Africa. He could say Chinese philosophy. He could talk about Asian philosophies. He could talk about European philosophies. He could talk any other person's philosophy. But when it reached to Africa, Friedrich Hegel said, no. These people cannot philosophize. They can't think. They can't. They have nothing. More or less saying tabula rasa, empty mind. And he argued that Africans were incapable of philosophizing. That is where it started. And you know, philosophy is about thinking. Yeah, it's about reasoning. It's about logic and illogicality. It's about deductive and deductive logic and reason. So he could not see anything inductive or deductive. He could not see anything epistemological in African brain prior to the Greece and Western civilization. Now, seen from Hegel's perspective, or Hegel himself rather, he felt that Africans deserved no praise in his research on philosophy through the history of the peoples of the world. And I think that, as we shall see, was a mistake, because that is not true. Not true. It could not see indigenous philosophies of the people. He could not see life cannot be lived without philosophy, because philosophy has to do with theorizing the issues for the future. It's all about, when you talk of sustainable development goals or millennium development goals, that they has to do before we came up with, or the global community came up with, or United Nations came up with it, there must have been philosophizing. So that it came. Even if you talk of big bodies like WHO, you know, United Nations Organization or World Health Organization, before these bodies came up, there must be somebody philosophizing it, or people philosophizing about it. There must be originator philosophizing about it. After all this philosophizing and theorizing about it, doubting, disagreement, being critical, creative, now a clear thing came out of the collegiality, or people teaming up together to bring up the whole now idea to cook that has been cooked by somebody whose original idea could even change drastically or change completely, whether you are the founder, the originator of the idea. So, seen from that perspective, Friedrich Hegel felt that Africans deserved no praise in the history of the people's world. So he got Africans out of history, and where they came from, he didn't bother to fold it up that their being there is out of philosophy. Philosophy is what keeps us. Nothing is important than philosophy, because philosophy is about thinking about our own existential history, existential characteristics, existential future. It's all about how we have journeyed through history to be where we are. So to say Africans did not have a philosophy or are incapable of philosophizing, I think that was a fallacy of the highest order. So let us ask ourselves, when is it not a philosophy? Why is philosophy? The question posed to me by this ABC Radio National, South Brisbane, Australia. When it is not a philosophy, Now, in defining Ubuntu as an aspect of African hospitality or as a philosophy, it is, of course, initially it was just an aspect of African philosophy that has been debated, argued, reasons, synthesized, analyzed, reflected upon. That now made it a philosophy now. We are no longer saying Ubuntu is an aspect of African philosophy, but we would just talk about African philosophy, a philosophy we are proud of. We can bequeath it to the whole world and tell everybody, this is what we take to you. This is a good package for you. If you employ Ubuntu, the Saddam Hussein, George Bush wars could not have taken place because Ubuntu will give you a solution. If there was, we took Ubuntu as a philosophy and practicalizes in our lives, maybe even COVID-19 would not have taken place. Of course, you may wonder how. I'll explain as we go on. Now, it is critical to underline that Ubuntu is described differently among the various African communities. For instance, it is called Unhu among the Shona of Zimbabwe. It is also called Ubuntu, the same phrase, among all the so-called Guni speakers. They are there in Southern Africa, including some parts of East Africa, Tanzania. We have Gunis who would call humane behavior. They call it Ubuntu, just as the Zulu in South Africa will call it Ubuntu. The Gunis will also call it Ubuntu. But you hear the Zimbabwe, who are also in Southern Africa, the Shonas will call it Unhu rather than Ubuntu. But it has the same meaning. It was there across Africa, just as the religious society has what they call golden rule of all religions, a rule for all religions, which says, do unto others what you would have them do unto you. Do it to them what you would have them do unto you, and to you do it to other people. All major religions call it Jainism, Sikhism, Taoism, Christianity, Islam, Baha'i, Rastafari, Confucianism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and many other religions of the world. They all have a common denominator in the sense that they all have that cross, golden rule, a golden rule of aphorism that says, do unto others what you would have them do unto you. What you would like to see done to you is what you should do to those other people. It's not just you expecting to be well treated, but you are mistreating other people. All these Unhu for Shona of Zimbabwe, Ubuntu for Zulus of South Africa and many communities in South Africa, Utu for Swahili speakers of East Africa, Utu, or Umundu for the Kikuyu of Kenya, or Umundu for the Kamba of Kenya. They all mean the same. So it is a philosophy of humaneness. It's all about, it all means being humane, being hospitable to other people, being hospitable to creation, being hospitable to creation, thinking through their concern as you are concerned and taking that into consideration. That is all what Ubuntu philosophy is all about. There's thinking through. That's why it's a philosophy. Thought about, analyzed, thought of, and it has passed the test. Basically, Ubuntu, or Ubuntu, you may pronounce Ubuntu or Ubuntu. It is both a philosophical and a religious concept. Of course, it is anglicized Ubuntu. rather than the Africanized Ubuntu. Ubuntu. You see the way you pull it in the African pronunciation may be different from the Western concept. Of course, that is the game of semantics. I'm not interested to pursue that. But basically, I've said it is both a philosophical and a religious concept that defines the individual in terms of his or her relationships with other people. In the African context, it suggests that the person one is to become by behaving with humanity is an ancestor worthy of respect or veneration. In other words, those who uphold the principle of Ubuntu throughout their earthly lives will be rewarded or promoted in death by becoming ancestors or the living dead. Now you see, in Africa, not everybody become an ancestor. Those who become ancestors are those who led exemplary life, as Professor Kwesi Dixon, the West African theologian, used to say, philosopher theologian used to say. Not everybody becomes an ancestor. Just because you have died or somebody has died, it doesn't. You can even be an evil spirit, yet ancestors bring good spirits that promote the well-being of the community in death or in life. They are mediators between God and humanity. Even when you are asleep, they can talk to you according to the African beliefs. And so if you read Ubuntu, thinking through other people's welfare and your own welfare as well, not just them, even to yourself, it was believed and it is believed that you become an ancestor. And ancestral spirit is not an ordinary spirit. It's more of it's like very close to a deity. Not a deity or God, no. Ancestral spirit has the intermediary power. The way Christians talk about Holy Spirit, intermediary power. Yes, it's a mediator between humanity and the people. Humanity and God, humanity and God. In turn, those who upheld the principle of Ubuntu throughout their earthly lives will not just be rewarded in death by becoming the living dead or ancestors or people who are with us and not with us, paradoxically with us and not with us. In turn, they will achieve a unity with those still living. Because they are mediators, there's a sense in which an African family has the living, the so-called dead, and the unborn. It's very interesting dimension of it all. In other words, whatever you do, you even think of the future. The unborn, those who are coming, those who will come many years. So thinking through the vision endless, not vision 2030, 2060, it's not an easy thing. It has to be philosophical. If you can plan and think through that the family consists of the living, the unborn, that's the future, and those who left before us, the ancestors. If that's an African family, in other words, somebody can come through ancestral spirit, through intermediary role, that shows it has been a thinking society, and children and adults and old people, the teachers in African informal education would sit down in the traditional African society and listen with young people and teach people, listen through as they ask questions around a fire camp, and they will debate these things about life, the cosmos, the existence, the universe, the cosmology, many things that are ontology and other things. The other question is, question 3, I am because we are. What does this express? What parallels does this notion have in Western philosophy? Now, let me say that as an African philosophy, Ubuntu Ubuntu expresses the African sense of community. That is, instead of I think, therefore I exist, the one of the Cartesians, or put it French philosopher René Descartes, that says cogito ergo sum, or I think, therefore I exist, which is individualistic, capitalistic, nothing communal in their thinking. So you can see the theoretical framework that is there within I think, therefore I exist, or cogito ergo sum. It is nothing but individual speaking. The framework is within individuality. Okay? Personal ability to do everything. Almost saying I can name myself, I can baptize myself, I can confer myself the honors I want. I think, therefore I am. It's like I can do anything on my own. Of course, I could be overdoing it for this gentleman, but we also have a reason. I'm also around to think what I think. I also have a reason. I am also regularly around to think. That is my interpretation. I think, therefore I am, or I exist. It can connote many things to us. To me as an African, the person called René Descartes, arguably the founder of Western philosophy, kind of gives a very, in my view as an African, a very false impression that on your own you can make it. You may not need others. Then you ask, why do we need governments? Why do we need churches? Why do we need social organizations, savings and credit circles? Why do we need banks? Why do we need cell phones? Phones. Why do we need tweets? Why do we need Facebook? Why do we need WhatsApp? Why do we need these things that are coming up with globalization? The breakthroughs of science and technology is actually to reach people, because you must undo the I think, therefore I exist, by trying to know by bringing out the communality that is in Ubuntu of communality. Where is the community? Where is the Ubuntu in this? It is not there. So the African goes the Ubuntu framework, where you say I am because we are, or I am related, therefore I am. In other words, I'm there because of the relating with other people. That Africa is not there because of just, of course, there is God in Africa all the years. God has been the starting point. But Africa cannot keep saying, I'm there just because we are Africa. We have all the minerals that are not exploited. All the golds and diamonds and platinum, they are here, not exploited. All the oil deposits, they are here, not exploited. Some of the best climate where you don't have winter and extreme winter, extreme summer, autumn, it is here in Africa, where everybody will spend less money when you are here, because the climate is palatable. It is good. So what am I saying? That an African would rather than the cogito ergo sum, the African will assert cognitas ergo sum. So it is cognitas ergo sum. It is not cogito ergo sum, but cognitas. Meaning community has come in. That I'm there because of my interaction and interdependence with others, my ability to work with other people, the collegiality therein, or even an existential cognitas sum ego sumus, meaning, so it is cognitas sum ego sumus, meaning I am related, therefore we are. We are because of our relationship. The naming, nobody even buries himself or herself, or cremates himself or herself. Nobody even serves food and cooks in the same hotel. It is others who cook it, you bring money, and nobody can learn the business alone. So the community has been emphasized through thinking through the realities of Africa. A story is told of one European who found people who came to Africa and then found people sharing deeply. He did not quarrel these people. He did not complain immediately. He looked a very humble man around 1800. But then he went back via boat, via ship, went back to Europe and came later with an axe. And then he came with very many axes, short axes, to cut firewood, because he had realized that they were sharing. And then he told the African people, there is something I've noted in you. You gave me everything. You are serious. Your animals I could feast. I could have meat from your animals. I could slaughter. You could slaughter for me. I found you people, you are very, very hospitable. You have a lot of Ubuntu. Ubuntu. You have a lot of humaneness, as opposed to Uburuane or Unyama. That is beastly behavior, where you mistreat strangers. Then he came up and told them, because you have Ubuntu, or you are humane and hospitable, I'm gonna give you, each one of you, an axe to cut firewood, so that you don't keep waiting for the only one axe that you have. When he supplied these short axes, and good one, but for that matter, very good ones, that is the end of that community, that area, that village. That is the end of their unity, because nobody woke up to borrow the axe. He divided those people, and he realized they are becoming weaker. If a rival clan came to beat them and fight them, they would have lost, because they were already divided by the fact that they were not meeting severally as they share this axe. What are we saying? Are we eulogizing poverty? Not at all. We are only saying there are various things that bring people together. It may look funny when looked at from an ethnocentric perspective or from another cultural yardsticks. But the reality of the matter is, it is good, and it can make people remain a society, rather than people who are very beastly to one another, people who are stressed because they are not sharing, or depressed because they are not sharing, they are not talking, they have nothing to keep up together, that kind of thing. So when we talk about cognita sum ego sumus, bringing the community there within, the African understanding of African philosophy, of which has community therein, it compares with John Beatty's summary of the philosophy underlying the African way of life, which says thus: I am because we are, and since we are, therefore I am. I am because we are, and since we are, therefore I am. There is also this Akan of Ghana, who is a community in Ghana, who have a saying that I belong by brand relationship, therefore I am. So those relationships makes me who I am. I'll not be there until and unless the relationship with others made it possible. Of course, God is there always in all this, but God has put people for me to relate with. So I am because of this relationship. Now, he did this parallels with the concretization of the being as being with in the Dasein analytic in Martin Heidegger's philosophy of being. Martin Heidegger is a Western scholar who, in a sense, also has some element of Ubuntu when he talks about being with in a so-called Dasein analytic philosophy, because he sees the being as being with. It is not being alone, but being with. That is something that makes Martin Heidegger a very good friend of Africa's Ubuntu philosophy. Now, allow me now to talk about communality. Now, communality defines the individual in terms of his or her relationship with others. It is called Unhu. We have said that among the Shona, Ubuntu among the Nguni speakers of Southern Africa, Utu among the Swahili speakers of East Africa, and Umundu among the Kikuyu of Kenya. Now, Nelson Mandela attempted an explanation of this Ubuntu and how it should be done when he brought in the hospitality concept therein. Let me quote him. A traveler through our country would stop at a village, and he or she didn't have to ask for food or for water. Once he stops, the people give him or her food, entertain him or her. That is one aspect of Ubuntu, and generally African hospitality. But Ubuntu has various aspects. Ubuntu does not mean that people should not enrich themselves. The question, therefore, is, are you going to do so in order to enable the community around you to improve? End of quotes. Desmond Tutu, the South African Archbishop, in 1989 also made a comment in regard to Ubuntu. I quote, "A person with Ubuntu is open and available to others, affirming of others, does not feel threatened that others are able and good, for he or she has a proper self-assurance that comes from knowing that he or she belongs in a greater whole and is diminished when others are humiliated or diminished, when others are tortured or oppressed." End of quote. So you can see in all this, the two great icons in Africa are talking about the community, about how even Mandela has said, even if it is looking for wealth and riches, it is okay, so long as they serve the community. It is so long as you don't support uburuane, torture, oppression, humiliation, diminishing others, backbiting others, hurting others. Yes, senseless killings. That is what Archbishop Tutu and Nelson Mandela saw in expounding on the social dimension of Ubuntu. Of course, Ubuntu has political dimension, spiritual dimension, economic dimension. There's also prudence in dispensation of both African hospitality and in understanding Ubuntu philosophy as a philosophy that is well propounded. So it is not a question of bride hospitality, bride dispensation. There are parameters. Yes, yeah, there are parameters therein. In I am because we are, who is we? That's another question posed by ABC Radio National Australia. ABC Radio National Australia, South Brisbane. I am because we are. In I am because we are, who is we? Can this ethic be harnessed, or has it historically been harnessed to privilege one clan, tribe, nation, or over another? Or is it always an expression of global kinship? Primarily, Ubuntu expresses itself well in the provision to the so-called our people, who may mean the members of the blood relatives, tribe mates, clan mates, political camp mates, social camp mates, gender camp mates, age mates, sort of camp mates, and so on and so forth. This has its obvious dangers, in that the criterion in determining who is our person and who is not one of us is indeed a very tricky situation. In a world touted to be a global village, an emphasis on our people versus them may prove very, very tricky and sometimes misleading. Of course, those are some of the issues to observe as weakening Ubuntu, because when we are not able to balance our people versus those other people, that is very, very, very dangerous, and we need to be very careful about it. Now, there is also sometimes the view that Ubuntu, people arguing it can promote tribalism because people go to their ethnic cocoons. But once we appreciate humanity of others, is my humanity, and we think through humanity as humanity, Ubuntu will not be accused of anything. It will not be accused of being unfair to women, as some have already done, of being promoting patriarchy, that the aphorism that says a person is a person because of other persons. It will not mean a man is a man because of other men, okay? Or just the way it says in Zulu or Ngunim Maxim, it says umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu, umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu. A person is a person through other persons. Or in the Kikuyu, mundu ni mundu ni undu wandu, mundu ni mundu ni undu wandu. Or among the Shona, munhu nekuda kwevanuhu. Okay? All this, it will no longer mean a man. It will mean a person is really a person regardless of gender. And that is the actual meaning of Ubuntu. But for those who may engage in using Ubuntu philosophy to divide the people, certainly that is fallacy, that is fallacious. Even the issues of corruption, there has been a lot of criticism. There's a lot of corruption in Africa, despite Ubuntu. Of course, we need to know what is corruption. Corruption, what is it? It is the abuse of public possession for private or sectoral gain. And it flourishes more where leaders and officials exercise power without accountability, where people don't employ Ubuntu to debate, to analyze the nation. Do we change the constitution? Do we change this? Do we go to parliament? Do we to change or bring out this? Do we devolve funds to reach the common one in the very village? When all these things are not taking place, that is where we have trouble. And we saw it in Mobutu Zaire, now DRC. We saw it in Abacha's Nigeria. We saw it in where there is a dictatorship. As Olusegun Obasanjo, the former president of Nigeria, once pointed out, in the African concept of appreciation and hospitality, a gift is a token. It is not demanded. The value is in the spirit of giving, not the material worth. The gift is made in the open, never in secret. Where a gift is excessive, it becomes an embarrassment and is returned. End of quote. So most people will agree with me that the official corruption as practiced by some modern African governments is nothing but uburuane, or abuse of African hospitality, or unyama, is beastly. And in reality, let us call a spade a spade. It is the theft from the nation. And the theft from the nation is always the theft from the weakest in the nation. That is the poor, the old, the disabled, the sick, the children, the newborns, and the yet to be born, which is a contrast to our cherished African hospitality. Surely, in the early days, when Ubuntu held the society tightly, before the corruption by incoming cultures in Africa, no one would eat unless or could eat together. For the needs of the individual were the needs of the society as a whole. Today, when some Africans engage in corruption, they are shamelessly eating while others are not eating. Indeed, this is an abuse of Ubuntu as we know it in Africa. The cause of all this sudden greed in Africa today is subject to further discussions. We cannot exhaust it today. There is also a critique that Ubuntu is there and doesn't allow dissenting voices in the community. So, in other words, Ubuntu can be abused. We abuse Ubuntu philosophy when, for instance, we hold an extremist view and a declaration that a person is a person only in the community may reduce an individual to nothing in the community. So when you are an individual, to use the Western concept of individualism, because there is a lot of Westernization today in Africa in the 21st century. So we must balance the communality and individualism in Africa today. It has to be balanced within the Ubuntu philosophy. Otherwise, the philosophy will fail to reason out and think through global trends or global trajectories. So, and as a result, group solidarities, however wrong they may be in their socio-religious ideologies, may impose, for instance, an immoral law on everyone and exclude the so-called minority in the particular society. In view of this, a dissenting voice may be seen as a criminal rather than as just dissenting one of us. In other words, what is the demarcating line between the group/communal solidarity and the personal responsibility? That remains another critical area that the philosophy will keep on threshing out. Equally, a poor student may want to escape his or her responsibility to work very hard but still expect his or her teacher to award more marks as a gesture of Ubuntu. This is wrong because Ubuntu is reasoning out. It doesn't mean you misuse the teacher. You misuse the other person in order to get hospitality from you or to get good gestures from you or humane treatment from you, and then you give inhumane treatment. That's another point. It should cut across. Similarly, a poor parent may want to escape his or her responsibility of paying fees for his or her child in the hope that the head teacher would invoke the Ubuntu spirit and just allow the child to go on with the studies. This is also Ubuntu and the post-colonial reconstruction of Africa. It is Ubuntu will actually lead in this new orchestra in rebuilding Africa, rebuilding the world, sharing the best from Africa, reminding the world we are this continent because of you, the other continent. It is you whom we trade with. It is you. Yeah, it is you. You cannot call Ubuntu Marxist collectivism, not at all. It is not about the bad wagons, because philosophy has reasoning. It is not appealing to the emotions as such. It is appealing to reasoning out towards others and recording that within the framework of I am because you are, or a person is a person because of other persons. That is how a true Ubuntu works out, and it is not something you can compromise. To say that Ubuntu has failed in addressing the concerns of African women, we may ask how. Now, while Ubuntu has an admirable way of emphasizing communal solidarity, it has been accused of failing in addressing the concerns of African women. In other words, its axiom that a person is a person through other persons appears to serve better when it is an African man to another African man. And this is, of course, due to the patriarchal nature of the traditional society, a phenomenon that is changing with time. So it is changing, and it's not just Africa where patriarchy has been there. patriarchy has been a thorn in the flesh of humanity for years and years. Even as we talk, we've not heard of an American woman president. As we have Tanzania, we have Suluhu Hassan, who replaced Dr. John Pombe Magufuli upon his death. We've not heard of a woman winning elected post in America, as we hear, or in other places. Like it happened during the time of Margaret Thatcher in UK, or Irene Johnson in Liberia. So you can see that the issue of patriarchy, because even if we don't speak it out, underneath, sociologically speaking, you always find there is down there, down underneath, you can see whether we are in those industrialized societies, there is element of patriarchy, the rule of men, not the rule of women or matriarchy, but patriarchy, the rule of men, where there is prejudice against women. Of course, we don't know whether we are trying to replace patriarchy with matriarchy, where the prejudice against women is replaced with prejudice against men. That is something we should also balance, because Ubuntu is a philosophy of thinking about our existential nature, our existential coexistence, and all that. So those are some of the issues Ubuntu has to sort it out without losing its dictum. You are a person, you are a person because of other persons. I'm a continent, I'm a person, I'm who I am because I need others. There is that symbiotic relationship amongst humanity, even with nature, the unity with the cosmos. So you cannot even mess the environment. You can't mess the rivers. You cannot mess the ozone layer with our releasing carbon, those destructive element there, and mess the ozone layer, because we are interconnected. There is that symbiotic relationship. There is that interdependence amongst the cosmos, amongst members of creation. Okay, so although this issue of women being placed down, it is really not really, it is working well because of this debating. So that is something. Now, in conclusion, that's something we need to consider about women within the 55 countries that constitute Africa, and see beyond one elected woman in 2007, Irene Johnson in Liberia. Do we have other places where a woman is elected? Not the question of being nominated or a post being left to him or to her because somebody has died, a man has died, but a person who has fought. Of course, this is an evolving thing, and the tempo is really moving at a graphically rather. Now, in conclusion, there are also some discussion of the relationship in Ubuntu between communal solidarity and personal responsibility. That has been considered that there are times when we need to focus on balancing the solidarity, the communal solidarity, and individual or personal responsibilities. Those are some of the areas that Ubuntu has to thresh out. But every philosophy, as I noted from the very beginning, has some defects. No philosophy is perfect. Call it existentialism by Soren Kierkegaard and others, and Paul Sartre and others. Call it process philosophy by Whitehead. Call it all philosophies have their underberries. They all have underberries. And to say that Ubuntu is what we can bequeath to the whole world is not an overstatement. We have something we can tell the world. Employ Ubuntu philosophy. Think within the framework of Ubuntu, where a person is always a person because of other persons. And there will be no hunger in the world. There will be no, more or less, we will work towards a classless society. Of course, it's a tall order. Marx tried it, it has not worked. But we can work it out using Ubuntu and in another fashion, and through thinking through, not Marx thinking for us, but the global community engaging in a discussion of purpose. It can be done. Thank you very much.